and welcome to World Insight's special Spring Festival series on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei in Beijing. Coming up on today's program, Rocking Beijing, we discuss the innovative sounds being created in China's modern music scene. And contemporary literature, a leading literary critic introduces us to China's avant-garde movement and the insights it offers into Chinese culture. Pop or jazz, classic or rock and roll, they are all part of the lively medley that makes up contemporary Chinese music. The digital music market alone was worth $91 million a year in the year 2014, and that jumped to already $600 million last year. It's been a major success story of recent years as the sector expands into new genres and new technologies. Take a look at this.
China's music scene has been thriving in recent years. Big gatherings like the MIDI Modern Music Festival and Strawberry Music Festival are attracting huge crowds. In 2014 alone, 148 outdoor music festivals netted nearly 380 million yuan from thousands of music fans. At its core is Chinese rock and roll. The 1980s saw founding fathers like Cui Jian and the Tang Dynasty bring a new kind of sound to the Middle Kingdom. It reached a peak in the early 90s with legendary band Black Panther, before going into a slow decline. But today, a revival is now in full swing, especially in Beijing and Shanghai, placing the rock movement as the central pillar of China's musical future.
A good way to get to know the music scene is by talking to the industry insiders. I sat down with Zheng Yu, a prominent music event promoter as well as founder and owner of Pilot Records, on a cold winter afternoon. I asked him about the Chinese rock and roll music market and how is it like today. Let's hear Zheng's answers. Zheng Yu, how did you become interested in rock and roll music at the very beginning?
Came from a musician family, so I grew up from all kind of music. I listen all kind of music. But when I'm in high school, listen first heavy metal songs from Motley Crue band. For Motley Crue, and the distortion guitar, is very powerful, and the sound I never heard before. I can feel all the blood go through my body, so be very excited. So yeah, at that time I just going through, and on the way never go back.
It is a life of no return.
Yeah.
How did you come up with the idea of combining symphony orchestra and rock and roll music?
Well, every year we try to find some way to present rock and roll music, some idea. So this year we found a new way to compare symphony orchestra with the rock and roll music. And the venue is the Great Hall of the People. So the whole idea very excited. And we enjoyed Tan Dun to join us and conduct and do all the arrangements. So this whole thing is very new experiments.
There are several bands, rock and roll bands, performed at that specific performance. Which one you enjoy the most?
I think they're all best. They're all doing very well. But Hangai is very special. So I really think the music is very special because they're very traditional Mongolian music with rock and roll, and this time with orchestra. You can imagine that. So you're very excited.
Grand and magnificent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and the Reflector, the young band, pop rock band, is very interested. So the arrangement is a little bit baroque style classical music with punk bands. So the effects are very special, and especially there's the first sounds. 什么幻想、理想、梦想，想来想去就觉得那么的多。在忙碌的人群中盲目的走过，却不曾改变孤独的我。出发！ So audience very excited when
yes,
the song
the audience
came
was
up,
appalled.
Yeah. And Song Dongye is very young, famous urban singer. So his music is very clean, very beautiful.
真的弄小气，谁会不厌其烦地安慰无知的少年？
With orchestra, so the music is more layers.
不顾那些，所以跟我走吧，弄小气。
Zheng Yu, you have been a producer of rock and roll music and indie music for a long time in China. At the very beginning, it was very tough, I understand. Things seem to be getting a little bit better. Has it?
So 10 years ago, rock and roll still is an underground culture, most of them, and but right now the China is growing fast. The entertainment industry is growing fast. So also rock and roll music, and I think young people enjoy that. I think they try to find something from their heart. So yeah, and more bands getting pop. They write some pop songs, pop melody and lyrics. So I think in China it's not just pop music right now. They have indie, rock,
Heavy metal.
Yeah, heavy metal.
All these kind of genres.
Yeah. So the young people enjoy every kind of music, and the internet. So they are very easy to get that. So I think that for the China music marketing is very great things, and we have more music festival. I think 1 year like 200 per year of the whole country, and more live house. So all the rock and roll culture is growing in China.
I was told in Beijing alone there are about several thousand bands. Is that true?
Yeah. I think like 3,000 or 4,000 bands.
Wow.
Yeah. Getting more.
Is there a difference among various generations in terms of the kinds of rock and roll they like?
Yeah, I think so. So right now, I think young people like very cool fashion rock music, and in my generation, we like something old school and it's a total more
the 70s.
rock. 70s, yeah. But for the born after 90s, they like more electronic, very or post-punk, that kind of music. So I think it's more international, So the taste is more international.
What do you think, as a very experienced producer of rock and roll music, and one who's devoted more than 15 years to this music genre in China, its future?
Well, I think rock and roll in China has a very bright future. Every kids will learn instruments, will play guitars, will have their rock and roll lives, enjoy their lives. So yeah, that's the future.
Yes, indeed, that is the future. And for more on this, we are joined here in the Beijing studio by Kaiser Kuo, who is a guitarist of Chunqiu, a heavy metal band. He's formerly also the guitarist of Tang Dynasty, a well-known Chinese band. Welcome, sir.
Thanks, Taylor.
Also joining us in the Beijing studio, we have David Moser, who is a jazz pianist. Welcome as well.
Thank you.
First of all, the two of you probably should give us some references about yourself, so that what you're saying about Chinese rock and roll is making sense. So let's start with you, Kaiser.
Sure. I came here in 1988, and late in the year I started the band that would become Tang Dynasty. The band was formally put together in '89, and I came back to the band a few times in the early '90s, and then rejoined from '96 to '99. From about 2001, I've been playing in a band called Chunqiu, Spring and Autumn. Yeah.
It is really something, Tang Dynasty.
Well, yeah, it did become something. It had very little to do with it becoming something. It all happened mostly in my absence. But
Very modest. David, what about you? You started from the very beginning, right? When the music scene was active in China.
That's right. Well, when I came here, the same time Kaiser came, there wasn't much going on. I came here in '87, I think, and quickly got into the earliest jazz scene. But I came in contact with all those rock musicians like Zhang Tianshuo and Cui Jian, who actually were very interested in jazz. So I ended up playing with a lot of those people in various bands all through the '90s, and now it's mostly jazz. My hair is not long enough to do that.
Well, you're a jazz musician,
Yeah,
so
right.
that makes sense. So
Right.
we got a diversity over here.
Right.
But having said that, though, what is Chinese rock and roll? Many have this question, especially for those from outside China. Is it just the Chinese version of the Western rock and roll, Kaiser?
well, I would like it to be something else. I would like it to have sort of recognizably Chinese characteristics, or something that identifies it and separates it as Chinese. And that's always sort of been my project with Tang Chao and with Chunqiu. I've always wanted to sort of inject something in that didn't feel shoehorned in and Orientalist. But I think that no, but for the most part, it you know, lyrical themes aside, with the occasional kind of reference to Chinese music. Otherwise, it's pretty much Western rock music played by Chinese people. Yeah.
Agree, David?
Yes, very much so. I mean, there was this period, I think, in the early days when musicians were just they were desperately trying to listen to the rock music because they didn't get access to it very much. So there was a period of imitation. But even from the very beginning, I think, and a lot of some of Cui Jian's stuff is actually quite original.
Yeah,
it has its own style. It doesn't really sound like
and
Western
not just
rock.
Western. I think Cui Jian's music had an awful lot of influences from some of the very international band that he put together back in the 1980s. You know, people like Eddie from Madagascar. I mean, there was a lot of sort of world beat stuff going on, and he's always remained very eclectic.
我曾经问个不休，你何时跟我走？可你却总是笑我一无所有。
Cui Jian, of course, is one of those legendary figures in Chinese rock scene. But generally speaking, has Chinese rock and roll sought its own path, or really it's mainly a repetition of the others?
Yeah, I think that unfortunately there's very little that I would point to and say this is really
Originality,
uniquely.
for example.
Yeah, I think it's still locked into a mostly imitative kind of phase. There isn't much that I would point to and say this is distinctly original. There are a few bands, I think some of them that are worth mentioning would be like Ziyue or Arshou Meigui, Secondhand Rose, that were quite distinct and really innovative and original. But that's not the mainstream.
That's not the mainstream, but many wonder, will the mainstream be the ones be heard? Or actually some of the other bands that you have just said, mentioned, unique ones, actually are becoming bigger names than all of the so-called the rest of the scene?
Well, I think it's similar to in the West in that you have a very active independent and underground and less than mainstream scene where you have lots of experimentation, lots of different styles, but the things that seem to seep to the top tend to be the more pop-oriented, the things that have traditional melodies and love songs and this sort of thing. And we were just talking actually before we came here about how the effect of some of these shows, like the American Idol clones, like 中国好声音, or these, actually sort of help to bring in different styles because those shows are on every week, so they sort of need to bring on unique or interesting talent, otherwise the audience gets bored. So the influence of those shows has allowed some different experimentation to happen in the mainstream.
But of course there's a lot of debate in the Chinese rock scene about whether that's a good opportunity or not necessarily so, when it's becoming more commercial, when it's becoming quote-unquote more entertainment and quote-unquote more mainstream.
Right, I think that's always a tension. I mean, I think rock music, the world over, wherever it's immersed, has always existed in this tension. You know, do we surrender something in the originality and the sort of fight the good fight when we try to go mainstream? And it's a healthy tension. I think it's one that it ought to be there. It's ineradicable. And,
but you know, Chinese rock music particularly has established itself by being against the establishment. from the very beginning, or has never been incorporated into the mainstream and seem to take pride of it to a certain extent. So the question is, if it has become the mainstream, will it still maintain so-called the coolness, which is necessary to a certain extent about rock and roll?
It's in no danger of becoming mainstream right now. Let's just, I mean, the simple fact is the vast majority of people do not listen to it. It's extremely peripheral to what they're interested in. If you were to walk into a white-collar office in any Chinese city, you know, the second or third tier city, and grab everyone's smartphones and look at their playlists, you wouldn't find much rock music on it at all. You would find real uniformity or homogeneity in it. Right?
I think what you hear now in pop music are aspects of rock. You hear a rock beat, you hear some style of rock singing, just like you hear rap. You have pieces of rap or some rap style, but it's not pure rap, and just like you're not hearing is not really rock and roll. It's rock influenced pop. And that's what you're hearing.
Well, certainly you wouldn't expect the people to go into the live houses all the time. However, we do see that certain rock and roll bands getting ever more popular, even on TV, or go to the music festivals in which there will be hundreds of thousands sometimes participating, young people or people of various ages, and they are really the center of attention. So many wonder, is rock and roll still, quote unquote, being marginalized in China, or it has already become quite a big chunk of the overall youth entertainment, at least in the cities?
Well, China's a big country. It has that fortune. So even if a tiny percentage of people are interested in it and are willing to spend that amount of money and spend that weekend going to a festival, it's going to look like there's a large audience. But the fact is, there isn't. It's still quite marginal. It's still quite peripheral.
But I would say rock music will always, I think, have the tendency to be youth music. Even though we have the Rolling Stones, who are now like 90 years old or something,
like us,
like us, right? But rock as a spirit still has this youthful quality, and young people will always be attracted to it because of just the energy, and it does have a sort of rebellious quality, I think, intrinsically, which is one of the things that attracts young people to it.
But the thing is, will rock and roll, Chinese rock and roll, be able to seek its own path? That's always an interesting question, isn't it? And what does it take for it to be sustainable? You will see here in China already certain kinds of Voices of China, that kind of reality shows already incorporated rock and roll musicians onto the stage, and they were doing certain kind of promotions about rock and roll music. Of course, some may not be eventually broadcast, but these are becoming new scenes. So will this new phenomenon mean something? And if it does, what it really is likely to lead China's rock and roll to? Kaiser.
Yeah, I'm not very optimistic about it. I think that the seed is healthy, but the soil is hostile.
Rock and roll music will never be optimistic, right?
No, it can be very optimistic. I think I speak from experience here.
Okay.
But I think that the seed is very healthy. The soil is very hostile. I mean, we're in a period of China's development where people just that's not what they want out of music. It is mainly a shallow entertainment. I do not regularly encounter, in fact, I almost have never encountered young people who are not themselves musicians who experience the same sort of rapturous transport while listening to music that I did when I was, a college student, or I was in high school, or even in junior high. Who I mean, for whom it's just all absorbing. I mean, that just doesn't happen here. Instead it's something that, to relax you after a long, hard day at work.
Why not?
It's the stage of development that we're in. I think China is in still kind of a primitive capital accumulation phase, and people aren't. I mean, it's the same reason why we're not seeing a tremendous foment in the graphic arts. I mean, arguably, I think it's quite.
It's very interesting you mention about that, because some of the bands that are really becoming bigger names these days, at least for those who like rock and roll, are those bands who have been there for 10 years or even 20 years. They went through a lot of hardship, ups and downs. These bands coming back together, and all different kinds of challenges that they would face as musicians in Chinese society, and eventually get to where it is. It's interesting that their songs, which they wrote, for example, 10 or 15 years ago, have becoming so echoing to the current generation.
It's more like 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I mean, to be honest. I mean, and I think that this is because rock does flourish amidst adversity. It needs challenge in order to grow. It's something that it should face challenges. It needs to. Otherwise, it doesn't take on. I mean, I think part of the problem in the early phase of Chinese rock music was it was just too darned easy. There wasn't competition. It wasn't difficult to find venues and to play. And then it didn't weed out people who weren't all that talented. People who have had the tenacity and who would have doggedly stuck to it all these years. They've been through a lot. They've accumulated a lot of valuable experience, and that's why.
Will the younger generation, let's just say in their 20s, really bring something to Chinese rock and roll?
I think they already are. I mean, as I say, if you listen to, I have heard that there's something like 1,000 recording studios in Beijing alone, and they're recording music every night.
Quantity means quality, though.
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
But that much quantity will eventually lead to there is some quality. The problem is that it's hard to get an audience. It's hard to build an audience because they don't have an outlet. And if China wants to make this kind of music into part of its soft power to like get overseas audience, then it has a very big obstacle, which is a language barrier. You have to sing usually your songs in English these days to get a worldwide audience.
You're already thinking very politically soft power.
Well,
but you know,
hard rock, soft power, right?
Well, right. These days there are new ways of doing music. Everybody could have their own music studio. They can just produce their own CDs and put it out there. So will this bring a lot of opportunities?
I think eventually it will.
Or actually everybody is there and therefore it's so crowded and therefore nothing can be coming out of this?
I think it's a terrific thing that anyone with with a Mac and a couple of microphones can make music. The democratization of it has been wonderful, but let's look at what's actually happened. I mean, what web hits have actually happened in China? What have we had? We've had 老鼠爱大米. We've had 小苹果. I mean, it's just pretty execrable stuff, right? I mean, so far, no. But I'm optimistic that it will eventually. I mean, we'll find some wheat among the chaff.
All right, David.
Well, I'm optimistic too. I tend to think, we both like music and we do listen to a lot of music, but we're not really in the middle of the scene because we have jobs and we're out. And I believe that right now on the web or somewhere in Beijing, Shanghai, is some really interesting, great rock and roll that we just haven't heard yet.
Yeah, I agree.
It's always safe to say that, but it's always promising also to say that. It is always true.
Come see us. We'd love to hear it and we'll promote you.
Well. Well, thank you so much, David Moser. Kaiser Kuo. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our next topic coming right up. Contemporary literature, our leading literary critic, introduces us to China's avant-garde movement and the insights it offers into Chinese culture. Welcome back. Next, we turn to Chinese literature. The long history of Chinese writings have been celebrated the world over. In the 1980s, a group of contemporary writers emerged and became leading figures of what became known as the Chinese avant-garde movement. The genre has been widely recognized on the international stage and counts Nobel Prize winner Mo Yan among its members. The works of these modern masters provides a real insight into China of today. Let's take a look at some of the big names of the movement.
The 1980s saw a group of young writers shake up the world of Chinese literature. It was a time of unconventional styles where once taboo subjects suddenly became open for exploration. Literary experimentation flourished, with writers such as Wang Meng, Zhang Xinxin, and Zhang Pu experimenting with modernist language and new perspectives. Another group of writers, collectively known as the Roots movement, including Han Xiaogong and Mo Yan, sought to reconnect literature and culture to Chinese traditions. Other writers like Yu Hua, Ge Fei, and Su Tong tried a more avant-garde approach to writing that was daring in form and language.
The writings of a nation can provide a unique insight into the culture of a people. Earlier, I spoke to Professor Andrea Raymond Ashita from the Institute of Asian and Oriental Studies in the University of Zurich. An expert and critic of contemporary Chinese literature, she spent years immersed in the great names of the avant-garde movement. In her experience, the exchange of writings between China and the West is like a kind of dialogue that helps both sides understand each other better.
Ms. Raymond Ashita, welcome to CCTV News.
Thank you very much.
The evolvement of the Chinese society in such a rapid speed provides authors with enormous amount of materials that they could work with. On the other hand, they themselves could also be struggling to catch up what the realities are and to think about the realities, and many wonder whether they even have the time to think about the realities when the realities have been keep on changing. What do you think about this phenomenon and its impact on their works?
I think you need to have sort of a cold-blooded approach to it, and you do not have to catch everything. You have to get the essence of it. And this is what this group of authors is so absolutely strong in. Take Moyen. Moyen, with every novel, he brings up a new deep philosophical question, and he works it through seemingly effortlessly with seemingly random examples from the history, beginning from the Republican times through today. In various novels, he has actually done the whole period, like Frogs goes actually through the whole period of time, and you have the real spirit of the times in a few accurate observations and symbolic descriptions. You understand what it means to have lived in that time and to have struggled to survive in these times, and the struggles for survival were never identical.
The struggle to survive is an interesting thing because that has been reflected in many works of this generation. But on the other hand, do they go one step deeper than just to reflect what is it like to survive?
A reality beyond reality. I would rather go to a different way of thinking about it. I would say the struggle to survive, we would assume from the outside, is just a biological issue, but it isn't. And the interesting thing is how these figures, especially if they are poor people, are also struggling to preserve their dignity and also their emotional wealth, their humanity. Best example is Bifeyu's novel about the blind people, Tuina, where they actually also explain that if you live in a world where everybody can see and you yourself don't see, you have other priorities, and then you have a different approach to reality, which doesn't mean it is a wrong approach. It can be at certain times a much better approach if you lack something than if you have everything the others have. And I found this a very, very telling example. Of course, you could also go into examples with Gurfei here and show that you can also be blind when you have eyes, like in Mizhou, this early story about a conflict of interests between family bonds and then the political or the military bonds that are there, and then people actually get totally lost in trying to figure out what is actually happening.
There are different theories about what this generation of writers has been. Some suggest they have been continuously rebellious, as you said, in different ways. Others suggest that some from the very beginning, others at the current stage have been already assimilated, quote unquote, to the realities, or by the realities. They are not as sharp as they were before. They were not as critical as they were before. So what do you make of these kind of comments? What do you think about them? Or actually they're very different. Help us to understand this.
I would say they are addressing problems differently, but from the point of view of what needs to be done. This is a value judgment, I think. And I would say that when they were beginning, they were just still very much in the revolutionary mood, and actually addressed the revolution with the same set of attitudes that they had learned in their youth, whereas now they are deeply, deeply critical of everything that has to do with the aesthetic notion of the sublime, which modernity, global modern culture is actually addicted to. So it's the high rises and the impressive emotions, the scandals, everything must be big and shocking and overwhelming. And I have seen many of these writers of this early generation turn to raising deep doubts about the sublime. And the best example here would be a poem by Sichuan, when he describes a journey with friends where they climb a mountain, and then there is 我们决定, 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 and they have to decide at every single step to do something differently from what they are expected to do. And this is a soft poem, but it is absolutely provocative, because it shows us how much it takes to just simply do something differently from the others.
These writers have become big names, or shall I say huge names, not only here domestically, but also on the international stage. After all, some of them even won the Nobel Prize. How much would that change mean to the contents of their work, to also the exposures they could have, the rethink of their own works, and that's reflected in their future plans or the current works they are working on?
China had a big advantage until modernity came, because writers or intellectuals, literati, the educated elite, was very important. They were the mediators between the political elite and the people. They lost this after the Cultural Revolution. The 1980s were the time when they were really prestigious, and then the 19th came, and it was all about money making. And I think what is happening now brings them back to a very important position in society. And this is an advantage that actually these writers and their society have over other societies where literature still struggles much more.
Well, it is bringing them back to the center stage, but whether they're fulfilling the role of standing on the center stage is another question.
But they are doing a very good job, if you ask me. I mean, Mo Yan was one of the most difficult Nobel Award winners that this world has seen, and he has been absolutely patient with these rumors, and he has been very sharp and has made very clear how he understands his function, and I think he won a lot of respect also worldwide for how he coped with it.
Some of these writers have already become millionaires, or 10 and 20 millionaires in China. That's quite impressive. Material life changes, it's okay. Will that have an impact, or have you observed their changes as a result of this? And also, have their observations and thinkings of the society that they are having stayed, rather than further moving on to what China is? That's a very interesting question to us.
You're now going far into the future with what you asked. I think the money side, the financial side of the enterprise should really, as you said, not really bother us too much, because
should not, but has it?
Hard to say. As long as novels like Di Qitian come out, I'm not worried. I think as long as the authors do not lose sight of where the real problems are and name them and address them in such a actually also aesthetically satisfying way, then I'm not really too worried about literature losing its momentum. With respect to the future, I think Chinese authors are, because they have been exposed to so much and rapid change, are much more fit to look also into the future sensitively and with open eyes than maybe other societies who are still trying to appease themselves and ignore the problems that are coming up, and we can see that with the recent events like the recent climate report and the refugees and all of that. It's always said that nobody expected this to happen, but why is that? Because we know it we've known it for a very long time. I think I haven't seen anybody saying anything like this in China as a comment on a novel that describes upcoming events. Yan Liangke is doing this very often as something that they wouldn't have expected.
How much do you think their works individually have been influenced by their reading experiences? A lot of their reading experiences with China's opening up and reform have been dealing with foreign literatures and foreign literature giants. I remember, Su Tong talk about DJ Salinger, Garcia. These can be his inspirational, literature companions, shall I say? How much do you think their work have been influenced by foreign literature, especially translated foreign literature, both in language, in content, and the way of thinking of the structures and the techniques?
I would like to encourage everybody to stop thinking about influence and rather speak about dialogue, because these foreign texts are actually intertextually intertwined with the Chinese texts. We find them all. Sartre is in frogs, and Kensaburo Oe is in frogs, and so we have polyphonous texts already, and it doesn't make any sense to disentangle in order to say, oh, this is he took from this author and this he took from that author. There's also a lot of traditional Chinese literature in this new, which I like a lot.
Give me an example.
Hong Lo Meng comes up at every other corner. I wouldn't even know where to start. Then if you take a novel like Feng Ru Fei Tun, Big Breasts and White Hips, there is actually there is a fusion of all the world religions in there, or say a peaceful marriage of all the world literature. So there's the Bible, there's the Quran, and there is the Buddhist canon in there.
So you don't think actually it can be talked as quote-unquote influence, but rather a dialogue?
I would prefer that term. And
who is the stronger part and who is the weaker part, quote-unquote, if you can categorize like that in this dialogue?
I would say that there was a time, for instance, during May 4th in the 1920s, when it was certainly an asymmetrical phenomenon, and the sadness of this asymmetry was also written into May 4th literature. But this is not the case now. This is a happy encounter now. There is a real exchange of symbols, of views, of values, and so I would no longer talk about asymmetries. I would say it is productive.
My final question to you is, can these authors really transcend borders and cultures? Earlier we talked about their backgrounds and the rapid changes in China and the context of it, and therefore readers, would they have challenge to read their works? That's one aspect of it. But on the other hand, can these authors, with where the country is, where they are in the country and coming in and out of the country, be able to be world thinkers, be able to also nurturing and inspires others of looking at the world?
You're asking here a very complicated question about the canon of world literature, and we all know that it is...
I didn't realize it was complicated, so, but anyway.
We all know that world literature is dominated by markets and by tastes, and it is not easy to open, for instance, the Western canon to other literatures, but it's happening. Post-colonial literatures are coming in, and so is Chinese literature. The problem is how much time global audiences will take to distinguish between a colorful multiculturalism and deep readings of differences. And I'm hoping for the second, of course.
Extremely interesting, our conversation. I really learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
That was our interview with Professor Andrea Raymond Ashita from the Institute of Asian and Oriental Studies in the University of Zurich. And with that, we come to the end of our show today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Inside CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Inside team, thanks for watching. Tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.